Okay, so we're now streaming live, and I hope everyone's well. May all of our studies be in the merit of the people of Israel, of the hostages, of our soldiers, and may Hashem bring peace very, very quickly. Okay, so we are continuing in the Kuzari. I want to, even though right now we're in the fourth essay, we're approaching the final and probably most lengthy discussion in the fourth essay. And the part of the fourth essay that I think is probably, I guess, what you would say the most innovative or maybe the most novel, meaning you're not going to see a lot of this anywhere else. There's a lot of discussion that is contained in the Kuzari that you could cross-reference to other texts. The discussion that we're going to embark upon now is Rabbi Yehuda Halevi quoting different sections of an ancient work called Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Creation. How many of you have heard of Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Creation? About half of you? Okay, that's probably representative of the general Jewish population, even those of you who are literate and have gone to yeshiva high school and seminary and things like that. Not everyone is familiar with this work because it's not widely studied, and for good reason, because it's one of the craziest texts you'll ever come across. And by crazy, I say that affectionately. I mean to say that it's extremely difficult to understand or decipher what even it's talking about. Like one of those mystical texts where when you open it up, you have no clue what's going on. You can't tell the top from the bottom. Now, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi finds this to be a significant text. And the question really that we have to get down to is why. So the first stop that we're going to embark on is back on page 260 in the Feldheim Kuzari, which is the very end of Ma'amar Sheni, the second essay of the Kuzari. At the very end of Ma'amar Sheni, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi had discussed Hebrew language and the importance and the uniqueness of Lashon-HaChodesh, the holy tongue, Hebrew, as conveying certain innate specialness and certain very, very wise qualities. And at the very end, he says, were I to expound further on this subject, the subject of Hebrew language, and its intricacies and wisdom and all of its rules, this book would become too lengthy. I have shown you only a small amount of this precise wisdom in order to demonstrate that dikduk, Hebrew grammar, and the intricacies of the Hebrew language is not something indiscriminate, but is organized logically and has been passed down faithfully. And then in paragraph 81, the final paragraph of the second Ma'amar, the Kuzari says, "This suffices to endear the language to me. I will now ask you to explain to me your portrayal of a servant of God. Afterwards," and that was really topic of the third essay, "afterwards, I will ask you about your arguments against the Karaites," once again contained in the third essay, which is logical because, he's sort of setting up the next section of the book. "And after that, I will ask you about your fundamentals of belief," which is the beginning of the fourth Ma'amar. "Then I will ask you what has remained with you of the earlier wisdoms. I want to know, you have claimed, Rabbi, you have claimed, the Khazar king says to his companion, his chavruta, the rabbi who's teaching him about Judaism, that there is more profundity contained within the Torah and its commentaries than even that is contained within Greek philosophy. So I'm going to ask you, since philosophy is a holistic system that claims to provide an understanding of everything, I'm going to ask you about where the Torah does that." This is where we already see, again, brought home to us what the whole project of Sefer HaKuzari is in defense of the despised faith. Remember, this is being written in the 12th century. Through the advent of the Islamic world, Greek philosophy is the new enlightenment of this era. before you think about the Renaissance Enlightenment, before you think about the post-Renaissance Enlightenment, think about the 12th century Enlightenment in Andalusia, which is southern Spain, which is controlled by a caliphate of Muslims who very much believe that the religion of Islam is not only the correct religion, but also conveys with it tremendous wisdom and knowledge of the whole world. Now, Islam, like its predecessor Christianity, had bolstered itself as a religion. In what way? To try and profess that it contained tremendous wisdom and not just faith claims, but also that it contained tremendous wisdom. So just like starting around the 4th or 5th century, Christianity started to embrace the study of Greek philosophy, mostly Platonic philosophy. Islam also embraced the study of philosophy, mostly Aristotelian philosophy. And the reason why religion tends to do that is because these religions profess to bring all you need about the knowledge of reality through our faith. We will set up our own academies. There's no such thing as a university that is devoid of religious doctrine, that is devoid of religious orientation. Okay, in the medieval world, places of higher learning were the seminary. They were not, the universities don't yet exist, right? So in order to provide wisdom to its clerics, you have to incorporate some body of knowledge that is not contained within Christianity first and then Islam, because they're limited. They're limited in their knowledge. Christianity brings the Old Testament and the New Testament. Islam brings the Quran. These texts do not contain science. They don't contain a knowledge of everything. And if you're going to claim to provide the best education and knowledge of everything, you've got to supplement that material. And so both Christianity, earlier time, like beginning in the 5th century, started to do that. So does Islam, starting around in the 10th or 11th century, starts to do that as well with its importation of philosophy. Now we come to Judaism. Rebbe Yehuda Halevi's whole project in writing the Kuzari is to say, we don't need to import anything into Judaism. Judaism is the original and it's the best. And not only is it the original because it is the foundation for both Christianity and Islam, it's also the best because contained within Torah, when you utilize our tradition properly, you will find all you need within Jewish literature to provide an understanding of all of reality. You do not need philosophy. You don't need to import the wisdom of the Greeks in order to understand the world correctly. That's a very bold claim. I'm not sure if we would support that claim today. If we were to say that you could find all the wisdom that you need just by studying traditional Jewish literature, what would you say? Could you put a man on the other say, could you put a man on the moon with the Talmud? That's going to be a hard one. According to the Kabbalists, you probably could put a man on the moon if you studied Kabbalah properly, right? But I'm not sure that any rabbi today would make that faith claim that all you need, well, maybe some would, all you need to know in order to know everything about the world correctly and accurately is to study traditional Torah texts, and that will provide you with all the wisdom about reality. But that's what Rebbe Yehuda Halevi is presenting to us in defense of a faith like Judaism that has been scorned by the other religions. And here, this is like one of the boldest things that he claims is now contained within Judaism. You don't need to go to the Greeks, right? You just need to go to the traditional Torah texts. Yes.
One-stop shopping.
Yes. Yeah. Do we have one-stop shopping in Toronto, by the way? I'm just wondering for Pesach, have you? Yeah, Sobeys. But I'm trying to find shmura matzah that's like edible, and I'm not sure if you can just use Sobeys as a one-stop. Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry, I digress. Yeah.
Rabbi Koropkin, the Montreal matzah is very edible.
Where can I buy it?
Rabbi, what's his name? I will look it up. One of the rabbis in the Soren Hill, he sells it.
Okay, thank you. If you find it, we'll make a public announcement. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Thought the case for Judaism would be one-stop shopping. I would think that the case would be that it's true.
Yeah, both of those. They're not. Those are not contradictory. You know what Rachel is suggesting. I would have thought that the case for Judaism is not one-stop shopping. I would have thought that the case is that it's true. There can only be one absolute truth, and if the Torah is absolutely true, then it would probably provide us with everything that a human being needs to know. That's the premise. That's the premise. Well, I guess because the argument is that if Hashem wants us to present us with the Torah, I mean, why did God present us with the Torah?
Hashem wants you to go to a doctor when you're sick. He doesn't say go to a Talmud Chacham when you're sick.
Yeah.
So obviously, you need to learn outside knowledge to be proficient in other spheres.
You need to know medicine in order to be able to be healed. But what if the knowledge, I think maybe Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's claim is that medical knowledge is contained within the Torah. So in other words, you have to be able to interpret, extract it. Yeah, that's what I think he's suggesting. Do you remember? I'm not sure. We learned this a long time ago that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi had claimed that all of the wisdom that is external to the Torah is actually part of the Torah. It was pilfered from King Solomon's court. Remember, we learned this a long time ago. I don't even remember. Someone wants to look at the index and let me know where that is, but it's in the Kuzari somewhere. I think it's either in the first or second essay, where he says that all external knowledge really was originally part of the Torah. And that's part of his defense of Judaism, and that Judaism was taking a beating in his time. People thought it was incomplete, certain parts were not rational, not based on rationality, and not intellectually sound. And therefore, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi pushes back and says, not only is everything in the Torah intellectually sound, but it's also the body, the source for all knowledge. That's really his argument. It's been his argument throughout this sefer. That doesn't mean that every single Jew who knows Tanakh and knows Torah Shebaal Peh has access to all of this information. Oh, thank you very much, Chaya. She sent us Rabbi Yarmush's phone number for Montreal Shmura. Oh, he sells it? Rabbi Yarmush. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. That's great. Okay.
Or is it more of a mindset of how the Torah teaches you to live? Meaning, it leads your mind to be open to other things. So it encourages, let's say, learning or knowledge from other people, whereas maybe other religions are much more closed. That this is what you believe, and this
all right. The question is fair. Is Linda's asking, is the idea here that the Torah teaches everything, or is the idea here that the Torah gives us the proper mindset to be open, to be receptive to all forms of knowledge? Yeah, and allows you to be more creative. Yeah, I think that would be. I think your second option is more appealing, but I don't think that that's actually here. I think what really Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is serious about is to try and present us with such a smattering of comprehensive knowledge that is contained within traditional Jewish teachings. Now, that's not to say that everyone will find that in the Tanakh, but he's going to present us with a sefer called Sefer Yetzirah for the purpose of making sure that we know that contained within Jewish literature is everything that a person needs in order to understand the world. Okay? You don't need to refer to Greek philosophy and science in order to understand the world properly. There's a tremendous amount of wisdom that is contained within our traditional Jewish writings. Or maybe I'm overstating the argument. Maybe another way of making the argument is, don't think that Judaism was unaware of all of these areas of knowledge. When you look at the Sefer Yetzirah, the book of creation, you'll see a tremendous wisdom and an understanding of the machinations of all of reality. And maybe that's perhaps a better way of stating the argument. But it's also, again, against Rabbi Yehuda Halevi is somewhat anti the importation of external knowledge in order to augment and supplement Judaism. That seems to be a recurring theme. Go ahead, Karen. Okay.
Whereas the Big Bang Theory only came about recently. So we didn't believe in the Big Bang Theory of infinite, like a 1 second beginning of the world. So
Creation, yeah.
Science caught up to us. So therefore, maybe in the Torah there is everything contained. We just have to wait until science catches up with us.
Yeah, that's a good way of framing it, Karen, saying so much of modern science is a complete reversal from Aristotle. Yeah, good argument. Okay, so in order for us, so Shlomi asks, is that what Yeshivim Panim LaTorah means, that everything can be found in the Torah? Yeah. Also, going even further, it's the rabbis in Pirkei Avos say, Hafachba v'hafachba dekulaba. Turn it over and turn it over again, because everything is contained within it. Yeah? So Rabbi Yehuda Levi, I believe, takes that quite literally and says that you can find everything that you need within the Torah and its commentaries. So Sefer Yetzirah is part of that. And Sefer Yetzirah, as we're going to uncover, is an ancient text that deals with how reality comes into existence. And once you have that knowledge, then you have the ability to create reality yourself. Hold off on that for just a second. So in order for us to appreciate, this is where we're coming to, where we now go back to page 451, fourth essay, paragraph 24, the Kuzari says, I would now like you to show me some of the remnants of your wisdom in the sciences, which you mentioned that you possess. So mishiyare is the Hebrew word, meaning that the only claim that you can make against Judaism, modern Judaism of his time, is that some of our stuff, some of our material was lost, right? We don't possess everything. If you recall, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi had made the same claim when it came to Hebrew language. Again, a defense against other languages which are more comprehensive and more robust. In the Hebrew language, there's maybe, based on Tanakh alone, there's maybe several hundred words, several hundred shoroshim that can be converted into different words. It's not a very large vocabulary. But Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's argument was that the Hebrew language was originally much more robust and comprehensive to describe all facets of the human experience. And so you shouldn't take just the words that you find in Tanakh as the totality of the Hebrew language. We've lost a lot over the course of centuries of being exiled and persecuted, because that's what happens to a people who are exiled and persecuted. We can't always contain all of our traditions, and things get compromised over the course of time. We have shiarim, we have remnants of what used to exist from previous generations. So if you look at the Sefer Yetzirah and you find certain things that are incomprehensible, appreciate the fact that earlier generations could read this text and make very good sense out of it. Okay, so the rabbi says that one of our works is Sefer Yetzirah, the book of creation by Avraham Avinu. It was written according to tradition by Avraham Avinu. It is very deep, and its commentary is quite lengthy. It instructs us about God's dominion and unity as he presides over creations, which on the one hand are disparate and varied, but which on the other hand are unified and harmonious. Their harmony stems from the one who has organized them. That's his introduction to Sefer Yetzirah, and the rest of this section, large paragraph 24, is going to be to quote various parts of Sefer Yetzirah. And I figured before we get into the intricacies of it, let's take a look at an introduction to Sefer Yetzirah. I was debating with myself how I should introduce Sefer Yetzirah. Should I do it from an academic standpoint, or should I do it from a traditional standpoint? I've opted to do it from a traditional standpoint, not because I'm ignorant of the scholarly work on Sefer Yetzirah, but rather because I don't view that as my role to provide you with all of the scholarship. There's a lot of scholarship. All you have to do is go to jewishencyclopedia.com and you'll find a lot of information about the historicity of Sefer Yetzirah, based on its style of writing and based upon the fragments that have been found. The earliest parts of Sefer Yetzirah probably date back to the time of the Talmud Bavli, which is around the 4th century. But according to tradition, it goes back to Avraham Avinu, who received the text orally or was able to either receive it or compile it or deduce it. And it is something that, as we're going to learn later on in this section, it is something that Avraham Avinu chose to figure out because he recognized that there was value in trying to understand and decipher the machinations of the universe. Now, with that said, at some point later in our discussion, after we've quoted a lot from Sefer Yetzirah, the king is going to ask the question, like, is this really all necessary? All of these things that you've provided me with about how God created the universe through the letters of the Hebrew alphabet, which, by the way, is now connecting back to the end of the second essay, where he talks about the specialness of the Hebrew language. We're now coming to Sefer Yetzirah, which confirms this specialness of the Hebrew language using the letters of the alphabet as sort of the building blocks about how God created the universe. So the Khazar king says, now hold on a second. I mean, this is all quite interesting. It's fascinating, the way that Sefer Yetzirah depicts how God used the letters of the alphabet and configured the letters in different ways until he gets all of physical reality. But why do I need to know this? And the answer that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi gives is also equally, if not more, fascinating, in that he says, in Hachinami, you're right, it's really not so important, but I felt I needed to show this to you so that you would appreciate that Judaism contains comprehensive wisdom of everything. Do you need to know it? No. Why then did Avraham Avinu compose it if it wasn't necessary? The answer that he gives is that Avraham Avinu went through different stages of development. He was at one stage in his life where he felt that I need to study the universe in order to find God. But once he found God, he no longer had a need to study science of the universe and how the universe functions. Okay? Are you with me? In other words, for Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, scientific inquiry is great if you're trying to discover Hashem. But once you've discovered Hashem and you have that emunah, not so important. Does anyone want to contrast Rabbi Yehuda Halevi with any other great thinker within Jewish tradition? Now, who am I thinking of? The Rambam, obviously, who is almost the diametric opposite on this one position with Rabbi Yehuda Halevi. The Rambam is dedicated to the project of discovering Hashem within a study of creation, within a study of reality. And he says the only way that you can actually reach your desired objective as a human being is by having a comprehensive knowledge of everything that exists, because it is only through that that you discover God. Two totally different views. I mean, like radically totally different views. Not like they're not even on the same page. They're in two different books about Judaism. And to me, that's like one of the most interesting features of studying medieval Jewish thought. Okay, go ahead, please. Either that or he figured it out through his own study and his contemplation, or his prophecy. It's not really clear. Now, if you look at my footnote, some attribute it to Rebbe Akiva, who received it as a traditional work that went back to Avraham. There are texts that suggest that Rebbe Akiva is the author of Sefer Yetzirah also. And so the way that the commentaries reconcile it is Avraham had it as an oral text, as an oral teaching, I should say, and then it was passed down generation after generation until Rebbe Akiva wrote it down.
I bet if you took, what I'm looking for, if you canvass scientists in the world, scientists, how many of them believe in Hashem? A small minority. So I don't really understand how people come to know God through science. My father used to get Scientific American every month.
Yeah.
There are so many scientists out there who don't believe in Hashem. Most of them don't.
Rachel's question is, how do you find God through science if so many scientists don't believe in God? I don't think that the Rambam was ever suggesting that through a study of science, a non-believer becomes a believer. I think what he was suggesting is that if a person starts off with a basic fundamental understanding that there is a God and that he's the creator of everything, there is an obligation for the human being to know God. And the only way to properly know God is to have a comprehensive knowledge of his creation. Correct. Correct. Right. It's predicated. Once you have the predicate of God exists and he's the creator, so then, or the mover, as Aristotle would call him, then you have an obligation, according to the Rambam, to understand God. And the only way to properly understand him as a human being is through a study of nature, through a study of God's universe. Okay? Yeah. Okay, so with the remaining 2 minutes that I have on the topic of the Kuzari, let me share with you we'll just start it. And the first part, this, by the way, there are many editions of Sefer Yetzirah that are readily available. And there are different books that are called Sefer Yetzirah. There's the earlier text and there's a later text. So it gets all quite confusing. So again, we're not going to go into the breakdown of all of the different versions of Sefer Yetzirah. Actually, when I was translating the Feldheim edition, I used the Sefer Yetzirah edition that was passed down by Rabbi Saadia Gaon. Saadia Gaon wrote a commentary on Sefer Yetzirah. So I used that text as my foundation and citing. Perhaps I should have used Vilna Gaon's text, who is a later commentary. But in any event, one thing we know for sure, it predates the Zohar by several centuries. That much we know. Now, let's just talk about, and I'm not going to go into the historicity, but if you'd like me to send you this text, I'm happy to. HaSefer Osek B'Sodot Shel Chaf Beit HaOtiot. Our text deals with the mystery contained within the 22 letters of the Aleph Bet. Inyan Eser Sefirot. It also deals with the 10 spheres, or sephirotic emanations, however you want to define the word sephira or sefirot. The Arba HaYesodot. It deals with the 4 elements: Eish, Ruach, Mayim, Va'afar. Fire, wind, water, and earth. Achar kach dan hasefer b'chamesh motzaot hadibur. Afterwards, Sefer Yetzirah deals with the 5 portions of the mouth that are utilized to pronounce letters. They are the garon, the chech, lashon, shinayim, usfatayim. They are the throat, the palate, the tongue, the teeth, and the lips. Now, why is that necessary? Well, anyone who studies pronunciation, like any speech therapists here in the audience, um, right? Speech therapists are very big on this, like what parts of the mouth contribute to the pronunciation of a letter. So for example, the letter B, what part of your mouth is used to pronounce the letter B? Your lips. What about the letter Het? That's a guttural, so that's your throat. What about the letter L? La 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 la. It's your palate, or maybe or it's your tongue against your palate. So there's a lot. So there's a breakdown in Sefer Yetzirah of breaking down the letters of the alphabet based upon the part of your mouth which pronounces that letter. Why is that relevant? Because God created us with the ability to pronounce different letters, but the fact that they're from different parts of the mouth means that there are letter groups that have different sort of powers based upon the breakdown of those 5 letter groups. Achar kach b'shalosh amot shehein otiot aleph mem shin. The amot, I guess, means the master letters. I think that's what he means by that, which are the letters aleph, mem, and shin. V'achar kach b'sheva otiot kfulot beged kafrat, and then the 7 double letters, which means that these are letters that have dual pronunciations, whether they're soft or hard. Beis Gimel Dalid, Kaf, Pei, Resh, and Taf, and they receive what's called a dagesh kal in Hebrew grammar. We'll get into that a little bit later. Im dagesh biladav, whether or not it has a dagesh, right? So just as an example, bet and vet, kaf and chaf, dual pronunciations based upon the dagesh. V'harbei inyanim hakshurim lemispar sheva, many matters that are tied to the number 7, because 7 was the primary number that God used in the creation of physical reality. Uvishtem esrei otiot pshutot anish arot, and the 12 remaining simple letters, once you've dispensed with the 3 master letters and the 7 double letters, you're left with 12 regular letters, which are Hey, Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet, Yud, Lamed, Nun, Samach, Ayin, Sadi, and Kuf. He then, Sefer Yetzirah deals with Yud Beit Chodshei Hashana, 12 months of the year, because time is one of the axes of reality. There's time, space, and soul are the 3 axes of the book of creation. Time, space, and soul. We only think of our universe having 2 axes, time and space. But Sefer Yetzirah says that there's an additional axis called the axis of the soul. The Yudbet Kochot Manhigim Shebanefesh, and therefore it deals with the 12, not only 12 months, which is the axis of time, but also the 12 forces that exist within the soul, which is the soul axis. Achar kach dan bekoach hakochavim, then it deals with the celestial bodies, the stars. Yudbet Gevulei Alachson, the 12, I think, longitudinal lines. I think that's what it means. Tilei or Tili Shel Hamazalot, and the trajectory of the celestial bodies, or the celestial, or the zodiac signs. Olam Shana Vanefesh, which really translate, after we've taken the totality, we have world, year, and soul. Those are the 3 axes. World is space, Shana is time, Nefesh is soul. The Yudbet Ibarim Shebegufa Adam, the 12 limbs that are, or 12 components of a human body. Umisayim HaSefer B'milim, and the book ends with the following words. Eluheim Esrim Ushtaim Otiot. This is a compendium of the 22 letters of the alphabet. Shebahen Chakak HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that God utilized these 22 letters to engrave our world, ubara mehem et kol alamo, and through which he created his entire universe, bitzar bahem et kol hayitzor, and used them as engravement tools to create the entire existence, and et kol ha'atid latzur, and anything that would eventually come into existence. And there you have it. That's the function of Sefer Yetzirah. And that's the intelligible part of Sefer Yetzirah. So we'll continue along this discussion, Bezrat Hashem, next time. We'll get a little bit more into the book of creation. Yes? There you go. That's because we've lost a lot, you know. We've lost, remember, we started off by saying there's a lot in our tradition that we've lost. If you ask a Yemenite, they will tell you that they have two gimels, the gimel and the jimel, and the dalid and the thalid, the hard th, the and the ge, j, right? That's the duality of the sound. The resh is the hard one, because Sefer Yetzirah doesn't just use beged kefet, it uses beged kafrat. Okay, so where does the resh come in? There are only two places in all of Tanakh that I'm aware of, if I'm not mistaken, that the resh has a dagesh. So all exciting stuff if you're into that stuff, right? Okay, so we will get into this. So there's Rabbi Herschel Magid at Magid Matzah at Gmail, and then there's Rabbi Yarmush at Montreal Matzah, Montreal Shmura Matzah. Okay, and Shloimi says that there's a concept of leap of faith that Heschel talks about. At some point, the intellect cannot logically understand. Yes, I think the Rambam believes that as well. That's why I keep underscoring the idea that, according to the Rambam, a human being has to acquire whatever knowledge he can of God, and he can only do that through creation. That doesn't mean that once you study all of creation, you fully understand God. Even according to the Rambam, there is so much of God that is incomprehensible to the human mind. Okay, more to speak about at another time. Let's go into our parsha. Sorry for all of the esotericism from today. The beginning of Parshat Shemini is what we're going to be reading. We're going to read Parshat Shemini this Shabbos, and we're also going to be reading Parshat-HaChodesh, which is the beginning of from Exodus chapter 12, the first mitzvot that Moshe Rabbeinu gives to the Jewish people as a nation right before they leave Egypt. So we're thinking about Exodus, and we're thinking about matzah, and we're thinking about shmura matzah, and we're thinking about one-stop shopping, and we're thinking about all of these other things because we're in that season, right? So in that light, I'd like to share with you, let's study together a midrash from the beginning of Parshas Shemini that I think is relevant to this season, but also relevant to Jewish leadership. And I call it Moshe's conflict. And I think it's a conflict that maybe some of us may share with Moshe. So let's take a look at it. Rabbi Yudan b'shem Rabbi Yossi bar Yehuda, Rabbi Berechia b'shem Rabbi Yehoshua ben Korcha. These rabbis state as follows: Kol mem shana shahayu Yisrael bamidbar, the 40 years that the Jews were in the desert, lo nimna Moshe milashamesh b'chuhuna gedola. Moshe Rabbeinu served in the Mishkan as a Kohen Gadol. Now, that's not to be found anywhere in the text, but it's found in Tehillim. It says, Moshe v'Aharon b'chohanav. Say that Friday night in the Lecha Dodi. Moshe v'Aharon b'chohanav. That both Moshe and Aharon in their priestlyhood. Okay, so what does that imply? It implies that Moshe also had the status of a Kohen to some degree. Now, why is that important? You'll see why in just a moment. It doesn't mean that Moshe was the Kohen Gadol. Aharon was the Kohen Gadol. But what the Midrash seems to imply is that Moshe had certain privileges of entering the Mishkan at will, just like the Kohen Gadol. Okay? Amar Rabbi Elazar Bar Yossi, Pashot Hulan, Rabbi Elazar, commenting on this idea, is that it is obvious to us, Shebechaluk Lavan Shimesh Moshe, Kol Shivat Yemei HaMiluim, that for the first 7 days of the Miluim, how would you translate the word Miluim? What? Of the reserves. That's what we call it today. I'm on Miluim duty. But really, that's not what Miluim really means. Is it come from to fill in? Maybe that's how it's used today. But the Miluim was the days of completion. That's what Limale is, to complete. At Mispar Yamecha Amale, God says, I will complete your days. So the days of Miluim were the final days of completion of the Mishkan, before, like, the very last stages of it becoming operational. And that's where we open up our parsha, which is Vayihi Bayom HaShemini. The reason why this parsha is called Shemini is because it's the 8th day of these final stages of making sure everything is operational. And it's almost like lahavdil, like when you want to open up a theme park, you open it up first to all of the employees, and they ride all the roller coasters and they do all of the things that they're supposed to do, because you want to make sure that it's functioning properly before you open it up to the what? Before you open it up to the general audience, you want to make sure that it is fully operational and that everything is working the way it's supposed to work. And that's what happened in the Mishkan, is that there were 7 days of Miluim where they worked in the Beit HaMikdash, just without the general population participating. On the 8th day, it's like they open the doors of the theme park. They open up the doors of the Mishkan, and this is the very first time that all of Klal Yisrael is participating. So the first 7 days, the Midrash says that Moshe was wearing a white garment, not the priestly vestments, but wearing a white tunic, and that's how he worked as the Kohen Gadol during those first 7 days. Rabbi Tanchum b'shem Rabbi Yudan Tani kol shivat yimei hamiluim haya mishamesh Moshe b'chuhuna gedola v'lo sharta shechina al yado. And it seems like this opinion may actually disagree with the first opinion that Moshe had Kohen Gadol rights for all 40 years. According to this opinion, it could be that they disagree and they say, no, it was only for the first 7 days that Moshe had rights of being the Kohen Gadol, and he did all of the priestly work, but the divine presence did not come down. And it was only Hahu dichtiv vayar kol ha'am vayaronu vayiplu al pneihem. It was only on the 8th day when Aharon stepped in with the priestly vestments, took over the service from his brother Moshe, that all of a sudden the divine presence and the cloud comes down upon the Mishkan, and the entire nation sees Hashem's Shekhinah, and they fall on their face. That implies that before this 8th day, none of that, the people did not fall on their faces and prostrate before God, because he wasn't yet visible. Amar of Shmuel Bar Nachman, Kol Shivat Yemei Hasneh, Haya HaKadosh Baruch Hu Mefatet Moshe Sheilech B'Shlichuto LeMitzrayim. Now all of a sudden the Midrash shifts gears dramatically and says, let's go to an earlier historical period in Moshe's life. When God first appeared to Moshe in the burning bush, God pleaded with Moshe for 7 days. Moshe, I need you to be the redeemer of Israel. I need you to go back to Egypt and redeem the people. Why did it take God 7 days? Because Moshe was insistent that I'm not the right guy. Ahu dichtiv gam mitamol gam mishilshom gam me'oz dabercha el avdecha harei shisha. And the Midrash goes through. It says, if you look at the wording carefully, it says gam 3 times for 3 different times, and the word gam is to add and say twice that. So twice 3 is 6. So that you see 6 days. Uvashvi'i omar lo shlachna biyad tishlach. On the seventh day, Moshe says to God, God, send somebody else. So you've got 6 days of God cajoling, convincing, persuading Moshe. On the seventh day, Moshe finally says, Hashem, just send somebody else. And that's where the Torah says that God got upset with Moshe. So we'll get to that in just a minute. Omer lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Moshe, at omer shlach na biyad tishlach. Moshe, you say on this seventh day, God sends somebody else. Chayecha sha'ani tzorera lecha bichnafecha. You can be sure that I'm going to tie that to your hem. I'm holding you to that. In other words, I'm going to remind you the future about this moment. There are moments in our lives where you ever as a parent say, I want you to remember this moment when you're a parent, or like when you grow up, I want you to remember this moment because it's going to come back to haunt you. This is exactly what Hashem is telling Moshe. Okay, Ematai paralo. When did God sort of or invoke this moment? Rabbi Berechia Amar Rabbi Levi v'Rabbi Chelba. We have a machlokes between the sages. Rabbi Levi Amar Kol Zayin Yemei Adar Haya Mevakesh Haya Moshe Mevakesh Tefila b'Tachanunim sheYikanes leEretz Yisrael v'Shevi'i Amar Lo Ki Lo Ta'avor Et HaYarden Hazeh. For the first 7 days of the month of Adar, Moshe pleaded with God, please let me enter. This is the last year of his life. Please let me enter into Eretz Yisrael. And on the last day of his life, Zayin Adar, God said, no, you're not going in. Kilo ta'avor et hayarden hazeh, you're not crossing the Jordan. That's payback. Moshe, you refused to be the Redeemer. Eventually, Moshe finally agreed. But because you refused, it took 7 days and you refused even on the seventh day, your refusal to enter Eretz Yisrael is delivered on the seventh day of your pleading. Okay? Just dessert, we'll see. Okay? And Rabbi Chelbo Amar, Kol Zayin Yemei HaMiluim Haya Moshe Mishamesh B'chuna Gedola Uchusavur Shelo Haya. That for the first 7 days of the Mishkan's Miluim, this initiation period, Moshe was working as the Kohen Gadol, to the point where he started to think, hey, maybe I'm going to get to be the Kohen Gadol after all. And then, B'zayin Amar Lo Shelchahi, Ela Shel Aharon Achichahi. Day 7, God reveals to Moshe, I'm sorry, Moshe, it's not yours. It's going to your brother Aharon. And it's since on day 7, Moshe said, Shlachna b'yad tishlach, God says to Moshe on day 7 of the Miluim, Moshe, it's not yours. And therefore, on the 8th day, immediately after that, that's when Aharon started his new job. Okay? Ad kan the Midrash. That's the Midrash. So there's 2 opinions in the Midrash as when Moshe got payback for saying Shlachna b'yad tishlach. And according to one opinion, it was after 7 days of pleading to enter the land of Israel. And according to the second opinion, it was on the 7th day of the Miluim for the Mishkan. Now, our goal here for just another few minutes is to try and unpack this Midrash and try to perhaps present some idea about why these 2 pleadings are appropriate to Moshe's argument of Shlach na b'yad tishlach. Our suggestion is as follows. Long before God pleaded with Moshe to be the Redeemer, Moshe already knew, somehow prophetically, maybe it was alluded to him at the burning bush, that not only was he going to be the Redeemer, but he was going to be the giver of the Torah. And this is actually, you can find this, you can trace this back in the Psukim, I believe, but that's not the point for now. But what becomes clear is that the Midrash says, Amar Moshe, Atid ani leheasot. I'm just reading the bolded text in source number 2. Amar Moshe, Atid ani leheasot sirsur beincha uveinehem kishititein lahem et haTorah. Moshe says, I know God, I'm going to be the giver of the Torah. And we never find that Moshe refused that job. we never find in the text that Moshe didn't want to be the giver of the Torah. So Moshe had two roles. He was the redeemer of the Jews, but he was also the giver of the Torah. And our suggestion is that what Moshe was having trouble with was, how is it that the giver of the Torah is the same person as the redeemer? How can it be that the holiest person who has to create a bridge between heaven and earth is also going to be the one who speaks to Paro and deals with the prosaic needs of the people? And when we look through the story of the life of Moshe, we discover that this was probably something that was a recurring challenge for Moshe. It's the reason why Moshe had such difficulty when the Jews asked for meat. It was why he really said to Hashem in Parshat Bahalotcha, like, I can't deal with these people anymore. I'm okay giving them the Torah, being their teacher, but when it comes to their prosaic, everyday needs, like, I can't deal with that. And Moshe had difficulty with the synthesis of this world and the spiritual realm. And many times we find this in people's lives. We understand that we're composite beings. We have both a guf and a neshama, but we don't always know how to handle them in sync with each other. And this is the difficulty that Moshe had. He saw this duality, and in the early stages of his life, and perhaps it extended beyond, he couldn't reconcile completely how you fully synthesize guf and neshama. And so therefore, he had no problem being the giver of the Torah. He viewed that as the ultimate privilege for any human being, but he didn't want to be their redeemer. He just felt to go to Egypt and to deal and to pull people out of the schmutz and to deal with Paro and to do all of these things that involve a world political leader. That's not me. And therefore, he asked God to send somebody else. And I think that this is alluded to in the text itself. Why, when Moshe gave that final refusal on day 7, why did he say, Shalach na, God, please, either now or send, biyad tishlach, in the hand of, send? What does he mean, Shalach na, biyad tishlach? What is that word yad doing in that verse? And why is it said the word shalach mentioned twice? So I think that if you look earlier in that chapter, you'll notice that one of the things that God told Moshe to do was to take his hand, take your yad, your perfectly healthy yad, stick it on your chest, stick it, take your cloak, stick your hand like this, and now pull out your hand. And what does the Torah say? That it was leprous, right? We know that's what the Torah says. It's there in the psukim, right? And Vayotzi Avihine Yado Mitzarat Kashalak, his hand was all leprous. Then God says, put your hand back in. Moshe puts his hand back in. He takes it out. Vihine Shava Kivsaro, and it was healthy once again. That's the hand that Moshe was referring to. Moshe saw that there's a duality of hands. There's not just one hand. What Hashem was trying to impress upon Moshe was that the same hand that is healthy and pure and spiritually intact is the same hand that is leprous. They're the same hand. And there are times when a person has to deal with the tumah and the impurities of this world. And there are other times when that very same individual has to deal with the spiritual endeavors of bringing the Torah from Shamayim and bringing it down into this world. And you need to know how to synthesize the two, how to either integrate or synthesize. I've just read an essay that there's a difference between synthesis and integration. I won't go into that right now, but the fact is that you have to bring the two of them together. And Moshe, failing to appreciate that, but understanding what God is trying to communicate, says, I don't want the leprous hand. I just want the healthy hand. So Hashem, take that leprous hand and find somebody else. Okay, that's why he uses that word yad. And that's why Hashem gets upset. The Torah immediately says after that, Vayicharaf Hashem b'Moshe. God displays disappointment or anger with Moshe, and he talks about Aharon, his brother. He says, your brother Aharon is coming out to greet you. And as the Midrash seems to portray, this is when Hashem said, you've lost the kahuna. Your brother Aaron is going to come and he's going to be very happy to see you. Now, why did Hashem say that immediately after Moshe says, Shalach na biyad tishlach? So some commentaries like Rashi explain that the reason why Moshe was refusing was because he didn't feel it was right. I'm the younger brother, Aaron's there in Egypt, use him as the redeemer. But really on a deeper level, it wasn't so much that he was concerned about the honor of his brother, but really what he was concerned about is how can I contain both personas of both the leprous hand and the healthy hand in one individual? It's got to be that there's going to be a giver of the Torah and there's going to be a separate redeemer of Israel who's going to lead them through the desert. I can't be the same person. And Hashem says to Moshe, you've just lost the kahuna, because the kahuna requires that synthesis. You have to be able to take the mundane elements of this world and elevate them to the spiritual realm. If you fail to see the holiness of the mundane and you feel that you can't deal with the leprous hand of this reality, then how can you be the Kohen? How can you actively succeed in taking the elements, the animals and the flour and the oil of this mundane world and use it in the service of Hashem? And that's the reason why the Medrash says that there are two opinions as to what Moshe lost. Because the two roles that require a synthesis of heaven and earth are the kahuna, which takes those elements of this world and brings it up to Hashem, and the person who's going to lead the people to live in Eretz Yisrael, which is the ultimate synthesis of the mundane and the holy being brought together, where you can be a farmer in Eretz Yisrael and pick clementines in Israel and view yourself as doing something very, very holy. Okay, so that's the two opinions being communicated in the Midrash. And the reason why Hashem told Moshe that your brother is going to be happy when he sees you is because Hashem was foreshadowing for Moshe that as much as you think that on day 7 of the Miluim, that you're going to make it as the Kohen Gadol, no, realize that as much as I would have loved for you to be the Kohen Gadol, be happy for your brother Aharon when he gets appointed as the Kohen Gadol, because he has the ability. He's not going to be the giver of the Torah, that's you, Moshe, but he is going to be the person who can synthesize heaven and earth in the Mishkan and not you. And that's the reason why, just like Aaron will be happy to see you, you need to be happy to see him come on the 8th day and to do that service. And with that, we'll conclude. Any final comments? But Debbie says, couldn't Hashem have chosen another form of punishment than restricting his entry into Eretz Yisrael? The way we're explaining it is that it's not a punishment. It's the fact that Moshe was not capable of being that person to synthesize heaven and earth. Yes. Women do that. Yes. Yes.
Holy every single day, and that's why in school we always had our teachers tell us that we are like the Kohanim in the Beis Hamikdash, the women.
Yes.
The dirty diaper, you're scooping up the ashes of the karbanos. It's all to be made holy.
Rachel, you're saying so good. You're saying so good. No. You're absolutely right. And the fact is, I'm very grateful for that, because it leaves us very conflicted men who view the world in black and white to allow someone who has a greater appreciation of that synthesis, right? So the Maharal says that. The Maharal says exactly what you said, that women have this ability to see the holiness in the mundane much more than men do. That's why there's a pasuk that refers to women as being sha'ananot. Sha'anan, how would you translate the word sha'anan? Content, or in a state of harmony, is what the word sha'anan means. Women are sha'ananot, he says, because they can much easier see the lack of conflict in our physical existence. Men always see conflict and create dichotomies and dualities. And are much more black and white in our thinking. Okay, fantastic. Enough for today. Have a great week, everybody, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.